And welcome to Women Who Rock Investigates. This is your host, Ms. Diane Winbush. And so thank you for tuning in from our first media, Women Who Rock with Success. And today we're going to be talking, we're going to be doing a case study. And we're going to be talking about crime in America, what has really started with a lot of teens. Then we want to talk about both sides of the ratio, about how the police feel about it, and as well as how Americans, I guess, also see the crime. People perhaps maybe do not feel that they're protected, and we want to be able to get some resources. So we have a professional that's in the studio with us. He is none other than a media guru, and he's none other than Mr. Leonard Sipes. And so, good morning, and welcome to the show, Leonard.
Hi, Diane. Good morning.
So, we're gonna want you to first share with the audience a little bit about you. Share with the audience a little about you and why you got into the journalism field, and then what your take on it today as the experience that you have, received down through the years. I want you to share that a little bit with the audience, a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a former police officer who went to college, came out of college and did a couple more years of law enforcement and ended up as the senior specialist for crime prevention for the United States Department of Justice's clearinghouse. Then went on to other national jobs, basically talking to the media, providing crime statistics, providing crime prevention statistics, an overview with the research. Pretty much went from there to the Maryland Department of Public Safety, where I was Director of Public Information for a billion-dollar, 12,000 person agency, anywhere from corrections to law enforcement. Then I went to the federal government, criminal justice agency, being their senior spokesperson. And then I'm retired. And I'm quite happy to be in retirement. I got involved in media when I became the senior spokesperson for, as the senior specialist for crime prevention for the Department of Justice's clearinghouse. When I accepted the job, the person offering me the job basically said, one of your jobs is to talk to the media. And my response was, okay. And then a couple of days later, I'm dealing with Good Morning America. So it was sort of a baptism by fire. Okay. But I've handled tens of thousands of media calls from media inquiries from every major newspaper, every major network, every major international newspaper and network in the country. So 35 years of talking to the media. Changes, the media has gotten really interesting because back in my day, you had good, savvy criminal justice reporters, law enforcement reporters who knew their beats up one side, down the other. You really couldn't fool them. They were sort of a delight to have because they knew, in many cases, the situation better than you did. Most of those have retired. Most of those have moved on to other jobs. You have had huge cutbacks in the media throughout the United States, especially in newspapers. So, you no longer have the media numbers that you had at one time. The number of journalists have decreased considerably. The number of journalists who really know crime in the criminal justice system have plummeted. So now the reporters who I deal with on a day-to-day basis are pretty much general assignment reporters. Who are covering a fire one day and a flood the next day, and the next day it's crime statistics. So I got to do a lot of hand-holding and a lot of explaining as to what's currently happening with crime in their jurisdiction and throughout the country.
Okay, great. That's well. So tell us a little bit about Leonard. What are some of your takeaways when you were reporting before you went into retirement? What were some of the takeaways that you wanted to bring from your reporting, especially when it came to crime? Crime back then perhaps maybe is not as prevalent as it is today. Today we're out of hand with crime. So we want to kind of, before we go into the next segment, we want to talk about what did you expect when you go to perhaps maybe to the courtroom or perhaps to a scene or what have you, where you were reporting the crime. What was you expecting to grasp from that as a reporter?
Well, the crime situation has changed in terms of the sheer numbers. We are in many cases up on violent crime, but that's going to take some explanation because the last report from the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Department of Justice has two agencies, the Bureau of Justice Statistics and the FBI, and
Okay.
they both report different things. The Bureau of Justice Statistics does a national survey because the minority of crime is reported in the United States. So the Bureau of Justice Statistics does a survey, sort of think about on the same way that the U.S. Department of Census, the U.S. Census conducts their survey. They do a survey, try to get a handle on all crime. The latest statistics that we have from them just came out a couple of days ago, is that violent crime is up considerably in urban areas, and serious violent crime is up considerably in urban areas, but it's not up for the entire country per the Bureau of Justice Statistics. The latest data we have from the FBI comes from 2020. This is, by the way, this is 2021 data from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. They're always behind considerably. The last data that we have from the FBI is that homicides, and this is, again, for 2020. They're coming out with their 2021 report shortly, but homicides were up by about 30%. Violent crime was up by about 5%. Aggravated assaults were up by about 16%. If you take a look at other data from the major police chiefs association and other resources, violence is up considerably. Now we're beginning to see property crime after years of decline, property crime going up. So there's no simple solution. When somebody comes along and says, Mr. Sipes, just tell me, Len, just tell me, is crime up or down? It's not a simple solution. If you go to my website, crimeinaamerica.net, I have an overview of all of this under property and violent and property crime in the United States. Fear of crime is up exponentially. We're at the highest levels of fear of crime in years. Household crime per Gallup in urban areas is up. Firearm sales are going through the roof. Security sales are going through the roof. So I just took a look at data from Pew in terms of where Americans stand in terms of preferences regarding the midterm elections. And the first category is the economy. The next two categories are crime. If you add the two crime categories together, that's probably the top issue for citizens in the United States, crime and criminal justice. So everybody's concerned about crime. We have high levels of fear of crime. We have indicators from a variety of sources that violent crime is up considerably. We have indicators suggesting that homicides may have leveled off for 2021 or 2022. But again, if you go to crimeinaamerica.net, you will see at the top of the website a list of most dangerous cities. And there are cities there where homicides have gone down, and there are plenty of cities where homicides have gone up. So we're anxiously awaiting the 2021 report from the FBI to give a more nuanced and balanced approach to the numbers that we have. The early numbers we have from researchers for 2022 indicate basically the same thing. Violence is up, property crime is up. Property crime has been down for a long time, but now we have an indicator that property crime is up, which would be really interesting. And again, we have some indicator that homicides may have leveled off.
Okay, that's fair enough. So now you talked about urban communities, and we know that some of the factors of urban communities are due to, I guess, poverty type of an entity that they have used and what have you. So in your perspective, what have you seen throughout the years as to the reason why it is so high in the urban communities? Is it just a lack of training? Or it's just, urban communities are more the ones these communities are prone more to be able to be in crime? Because I know, especially with this, they got this new thing out about here in the South about the Kia vehicles. They're still in them, the Cadillac conversions.
Yes, that's true. That's all true. Urban communities, that gets to be, you have to consider everything involved when we're talking about urban communities. When I left law enforcement and studied criminology and criminal justice, the first thing you understand is that the correlation, the connection between income and crime has always throughout the decades has always been there. The lower income communities have higher levels of crime. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that it's when I'm talking about lower income communities, like urban communities, because there's a ton of communities in urban areas that are upper income or middle class. So it's not just an issue of urban communities, it's principally urban low-income communities.
Right.
And again, I mean, there are certain basics within criminology, there are certain basics within criminal justice, and one of those basics is that low income correlates with higher crime, higher rates of crime.
Okay, great. So now before the show started, we were talking about some things in regards to how sometimes we don't always get the full meat and potatoes of an idea. And so, of course, I don't want to be biased or highly opinionated in this. This is some cases, and I guess we want to just use cases in general. So how important is it, Leonard, for us to be able to get the full facts? A lot of time when individuals are reporting the media, we never get the full paradigm of what happened, what occurred. Sometimes we'll get only the parts of the clips that makes the America go excited, or people around the world. So how important, if you would share with us the importance of just waiting until all the facts are in, and then the people can be able to determine as to actually what happened in a crime. So take, for instance, we had an incident here. I'm between the border of Nashville and Memphis, Tennessee. So it was a crime that occurred, and the first thing that the parent was like, okay, oh no, you shouldn't be using excessive force on my son and what have you. And if you look at the video plainly, her child that's in school was the one that was, he was the one that instigated and pushed the police officer. So we don't supposed to, the police officer doesn't have a right to defend himself. How important is it for the public to just calm down, watch the whole video, get all of the facts first before they make a final judgment?
Well, first of all, in my agencies, one of my agencies was an emergency management agency for the state of Maryland, and they were one of my 12 agencies within the Maryland Department of Public Safety. And one of the things that I learned from going to federal emergency management training is that people do not view ongoing events from the data. People view ongoing events in terms of their preconceived notions, in terms of what's right and what's wrong. For years, since the George Floyd incident and before that, we have this sense that police officers are wrong, racist, bad, brutal. When you take a look at polling data, there are about 40 million contacts in the United States between police officers and citizens on a year-to-year basis. Anywhere between 2 to 3% of those contacts, and this is based upon surveys of people who had contact with law enforcement, 2 to 3% involve threat or the threat of force. 2 to 3%, which is hardly the stereotype of police officers being nasty and brutal. Poll after poll after poll indicates strong support for law enforcement from everybody. It doesn't matter what demographic you happen to belong to. There is strong support for law enforcement, and a strong support in terms of the honor and integrity of law enforcement officers. Having said that, you can start segmenting those polls and polling data in terms of race, in terms of political backgrounds in terms of age. And you're going to find younger people being more suspicious of law enforcement than older people. Right. You're going to find Democrats being more suspicious of law enforcement than Republicans. You're going to find African Americans being having a greater sense of skepticism regarding law enforcement than Hispanics or white Americans. Right. So everybody comes to any issue from their own perspective in terms of law enforcement. I can tell you, after spending 6 years in law enforcement and most of my career in terms of law enforcement support, that we are not infallible. I had an incident one night where I pulled somebody over on very suspicious circumstances. I asked him for his driver's license and registration card, and he said his registration card is in his glove compartment. Flipped open his glove compartment box, and there's the butt of a gun sticking out. So I pulled my gun, and I said, freeze. And in terms of a nervous reaction on his part, his right hand was headed towards that gun. It reached out. Not purposely, but involuntarily. And I'm screaming, no, freeze, stop. I'm a millimeter away of taking somebody's life. And that gun was a starter pistol used at track meets. It couldn't have hurt me. But it was very suspicious circumstances. It was in a high crime area. I saw a gun. He was reaching for the gun. I didn't fire. But right. Thank God I didn't, because I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. Right. So, it's ridiculously easy in the heat of the moment to make a mistake on the part of a law enforcement officer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's causing a lot of people in law enforcement to leave. We've had tens of thousands of police officers leave in the last couple of years because now they feel disrespected, and now they feel that there's just been a stereotype of law enforcement officers being brutal or racist or whatever. And we're talking about 700,000 human beings and another 300,000 civilians in support of law enforcement. So what we're doing is taking 1 million human beings and judging them based upon the actions of a few. The flip side of that is that every time I talk to law enforcement, I said, look, you've got to understand, we collectively, the criminal justice system, have played a role in racist policies in the United States. We have enforced Jim Crow. Look at the civil rights movement and the police dogs attacking protesters at the Edmund Pettit Bridge. I mean, these were all disgraceful events, and that's a legacy that we have to live with as we move forward. But I think most police officers in this country understand that legacy. They are interviewed heavily. They are polygraphed, given lie detector tests as to their feelings about whether it's transgender or African American or Hispanic or white or Catholic or Protestant, whatever. They're trying to get a sense as to whether or not this police officer is going to cause them an embarrassment, cause them a lawsuit, or do the wrong thing. So we try to filter out and get people who understand the history of racism in the country, and understand the history of law enforcement in the United States, and that they understand that it takes a tremendous amount of fortitude and good judgment and maturity to be a police officer and to do the right thing and to be sure that people are respected. So that's the difficulty in all of this. You asked about the media part of it. Years ago, you had good, savvy crime reporters out there who really knew their beats very, very well. Well, they've left. They've left journalism. We've lost thousands of journalists over the last 5-6 years. And so we don't have that many really good, savvy crime reporters out there any longer. So when you're getting the news from a general assignment reporter, that person doesn't have a lot of expertise regarding criminology, statistics, what's happening in their own criminal justice systems locally and throughout the country. So they really can't give you the context that you used to be able to get
Right.
from the good, savvy crime journalists. So, I watch TV every day. I read news reports every day, and every day I see things that are wrong within crime reporting. And, that's something it's the new journalism. It's the sheer reality that we've lost a lot of journalists and we've lost a lot of good journalists, and it doesn't help us to have lost that many good journalists.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you for so much for your comment on that. So with your experience, we're going to use like well, it's not I guess a scenario. This actually happened about a couple of days ago, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to talk about the police and the offender. So, and well, actually the law enforcement and the excessive force. So you have this situation where I think this offender was outrunning the police. So after they caught up with him, of course, the police officer went right up there and he slapped him. You see, whacked him right upside the head. They wore him out. But we have to think about the adrenaline part too. If you done hit me to chase you 30, 40, 50 miles, I'm already upset. I'm ready to go home, probably, bathe, shower, and get with my family. Now I got to chase you all over the world. And now after you come to a complete stop or a halt, then you want to get out and you want to run. When I saw that, and it was an African American guy, and it was a Caucasian, it was a white police officer, knocked the fire out of him. Was that police officer wrong? I don't think so. So I think I'm just sorry. At that one right there, I don't think that he was wrong with that. And so we always want to cry, oh, excessive force and things. Now some things are excessive force. Sometimes we're trained. I did a little law enforcement. It wasn't police, but it was in the corrections division. So we were trained different ways, how to do the strike and behind the ear and all of that to be able to help the defendant or offender or what have you to comply. But I didn't see anything wrong with it. He didn't knock him down. He just whacked him real good and stuff because he was trying to run from him. So help us to understand a little bit about that. I know training techniques have changed. Last time I was in law enforcement was 2008. So I know they probably have beefed it up or either lowered the standards for some, excessive force strikes and what have you. So tell us the importance, because you know what, Leonard, I don't think that some individuals, they don't understand what police officers can do in order to bring that offender up under full subjection. I mean, just like you said, you looked in the glove compartment. Guess what? There's the gun right there. Hey, look, I don't want you to shoot me, so I'm gonna pull mine out too. So,
Yeah.
so talk to us a little bit about that, so we can be able to understand. Parents can be able to understand. Family members can be able to understand. Look, don't start, and then we're gonna talk about mental illness too. That kind of irks me a little bit too. So every time somebody goes in and they does a shooting in the mall, here we come. We want to say, "Oh, he got mental illness." Okay, you're the family member. Why you didn't speak up? Why didn't you say? Okay, just take us with this excessive force thing first.
The excessive force does exist. So there's no doubt that it exists.
Okay.
You can't have 40 million contacts between police officers and civilians on a yearly basis in the United States without crap happening. Statistically speaking, it is impossible to do 40 million contacts on a yearly basis without things going south.
Right.
And as I said before, there's a couple polls that are out there interviewing people who have had interactions with law enforcement. The overwhelming majority of those polled, it doesn't matter the demographics, felt that the police officer acted fairly and acted appropriately. And then in 2 to 3% of those 40 million interactions on a yearly basis, it involved force or threat of force. So we're trained in the academy to try to establish control over the situation as quickly as we possibly can. We're trained to start real low in terms of how we handle that person. We're trained to handle that person respectfully. We're trained to handle that person in the proper way. Now, I've been pulled over by the police throughout my life. And, I'm not exactly sure that every police officer who pulled me over pulled me over appropriately. I'm not even quite sure they spoke to me appropriately.
Wow.
I didn't say, by the way, I'm an ex-cop. Cool down a little bit.
Right.
Law enforcement today, we have an increase in injuries to law enforcement. We have an increase in law enforcement deaths. A lot of those deaths, by the way, were due to COVID, and a lot were not. It's a dangerous job. It's a ridiculously dangerous job. You don't know. You never know exactly what it is that you're getting involved in when you respond to a call. You don't know. I went to a family reunion on a Sunday afternoon where a fight had broken out between two brothers. And they asked me if I wanted backup, and I said, I don't think so. I said, how bad can a family reunion be on a Sunday afternoon? And so, to make a long story short, I had to fight my way out of there. And had to fight multiple people. I mean, you never know what you're going to get involved in. You never know how it's going to go down. So I responded to another call of a woman who said her husband tried to shoot her, and I was first car in. And I get there, and there's this older woman standing on the porch holding a gun. She's holding it down, and it's the gun that her husband used to try to shoot her with. He's drunk, by the way.
Okay.
And I'm saying, and I stayed behind the car door of my police vehicle, and I said, ma'am, please put the gun down. And she goes, I don't want to put the gun down. He may come out and take it from me. And I said, well, if he does, I'll take care of him. But for the moment, please put the gun down. I don't know the circumstances. I know that a woman claimed that she was shot at by her husband, but I don't know the full circumstances. All I know that there's a woman on a front porch holding a gun, not at me, but down towards her porch. What am I supposed to make of that? And I'm saying, ma'am, so let me help you. Let me keep you safe. But for the moment, please put the gun down on the porch.
Right.
You don't know how people are going to respond to you. The data on arrest, most people are under the influence of something when they are arrested. The data on mental illness, and the majority of offenders, not necessarily the people that we come into contact with on a day-to-day basis, but the majority of offenders caught up in the criminal justice system have mental health backgrounds. So when you're dealing with somebody, you say to yourself, well, there's every probability based upon the data that this person is under the influence of drugs or alcohol. There's every possibility that this person could have a history of mental illness or emotional problems. This person may not process information like you and I are processing information right now. This person may react in a way that you would never expect because they're under the influence of drugs or because they have mental health issues. That becomes dangerous. It becomes really dangerous because people do things and they don't think about them. And they do things that make the cop really suspicious. So the bottom line is that the great majority of the 40 million contacts on a year-to-year basis within the United States, the vast overwhelming majority of citizens, this is from the U.S. Department of Justice, indicate that the police officer acted appropriately. 2 to 3% involved force or threat of force, which to me out of 40 million is extraordinary. And people need to understand that when a police officer stops you, he or she is saying to themselves, is this person going to be a danger to me? So I'm fully cooperative, to say the least, when a police officer stops me and investigates why I'm speeding or why I'm traveling through a neighborhood. And I just, try to put them at ease as much as I possibly can. If you run from a police officer, then that police officer is making an assumption that you've done something wrong. And that's dangerous because not everybody does that. Not everybody is doing something terribly wrong. We have a lot of people with high-speed chases who turned out to be 16 years old who were just simply too scared to pull over. We have a lot of high-speed chases with middle-aged housewives or husbands because they're smoked a joint or had a beer too many and are afraid of being, and they end up in a high-speed chase. without a criminal record.
Right.
So we have to be extraordinarily careful and make extraordinarily good judgment calls in terms of how we handle the public and whether or not we use force or threat of force. So my strongest advice to people is to simply comply with a police officer. And if the police officer is doing something wrong, take it up with your attorney at a later date.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So we want to talk about the National Rifle Association. Maybe a little. We're not gonna get opinionated. We want to address this because we want to reflect back on former President Donald Trump's statement. He stated that guns do not kill people, the people. And of course, we know that people have been up in the air with the NRA for, ever since this Trayvon Martin episode started, that they have been critical of the NRA and what have you. But it's the people are the ones that actually do kill. It's not the guns that kill. But look, okay, has it in your perspective, in your expertise, since in our state here in Tennessee, the governor approved for the citizens to carry a gun without a permit.
Yeah, open carry.
Huh?
Open carry.
Yes, and since that's happened, hold on. Since that's happened, we've had murders to fly out of the roof here in the state of Tennessee, specifically in the area of Memphis. And so we want to talk about that too. We don't want to, I guess I don't want to blame the NRA. That's where it's going now with Biden and Kamala Harris and things. It's basically the NRA. It's their fault. But I don't think so. I think it may be due to the laws that's being passed. I'm not an expert in this area. That's the reason why I have you here on the podcast or the show today. So you can be able to share that. So tell us a little bit about that and how we can be able to see how we can be able to curb that a little bit, even when there are laws that are passed, giving individuals the permission to carry.
Well, that's a very complicated question. I'll start off with the data. Okay. 7% of violent crime, according to the new Department of Justice report that just came out, 7% of violent crime involves firearms. So the overwhelming majority of what we call violent crime in this country does not involve firearms. However, if you take a look at FBI data in terms of firearms for two categories of crime, homicides and armed robberies, the majority of those events are committed with firearms. There are anywhere between 350 and 400 million firearms in the hands of private citizens in this country right now. We are the best armed citizens in the world because of how people interpret the Second Amendment. The NRA, I am assuming that the overwhelming majority of people who have bought firearms have never heard of the National Rifle Association. Okay. I'm not quite sure how the National Rifle Association, what they say or do not say. I'm not quite sure exactly how that has an impact when you have 350 to 400 million firearms in private hands in the United States. Right. So, do I agree with their policies? Not always. I mean, they offer a wonderful handgun training course and a firearms training course, and a firearms safety course. There's certain things about the NRA that I'm perfectly comfortable with. Okay. But there was legislation years ago, quite a few years ago, where the NRA was against quote unquote cop, was okay with citizens owning quote unquote cop killer bullets. Right. So needless to say, I was not particularly happy about that. I think the gun issue in the United States continues unabated. It's interesting that the latest data that I've seen is that the new gun owners are women and African Americans. Right. And, because of the fear of crime. Right. That's going on and the concern about crime that's going on. I'm not quite sure that anybody out there is saying, okay, I'm buying a gun because of the National Rifle Association. I think the National Rifle Association has become somewhat irrelevant when you consider the sheer number of firearms in private hands. Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so now we want to talk about too the difference between the sentencing. If you could be able to respond to that. So now we have crimes that perhaps maybe, so we may have crimes in America, Leonard, that perhaps maybe send an individual to prison for perhaps maybe 20 or 30 years. But then you have
Mm-hmm.
white collar crime incident over here, like Bernie Madoff,
Mm-hmm.
basically. But even though he did receive a long time, but some people don't. Some people do not receive a long length of time. So we want to talk about that as to, I guess, why some laws are a little relaxed, if you will, for some certain crimes, and reason why some crimes, and when it comes to embezzlement, I guess forfeiture, things like that, check writing fraud. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
those crimes are kind of more relaxed versus someone if you um, do carjacking. It don't even have to be murder. It can be something like carjacking. I know they were online. I saw a post on Facebook back here about 2 years ago where this man was sentenced to 8 years for stealing a sneaker bar. Now I'm pretty sure that's not the reason why the judge sentenced him to 8 years. I'm pretty sure it was something else attached on to his case before then. And so and I guess that's the reason why everyone was kind of outraged as to why he had to spend that much time in prison just for stealing a sneaker bar. And of course, I think they raised so much kerfuffle about it. Some other individuals and activists perhaps maybe have stepped in. So we want to talk about that a little bit, if you would, with your experience as the difference between the white collar crimes and the crimes where individuals perhaps maybe receive a little bit more penalizing due to the crime itself.
Yeah, Diane, I get requests on a fairly frequent basis, especially from college students, about the number of people in prison for smoking marijuana. Nobody, or possession of marijuana, possession of personal amounts. Nobody is in prison for smoking marijuana. Nobody's in prison for possessing small amounts. So let's get into the data. Per the U.S. Department of Justice, the average violent offender in the United States serves less than 3 years. That's not the sentence they got, it's how long they served. So the average time a violent offender serves in the United States is serves less than 3 years. The average amount of time that a property offender serves is less than 2 years. So yeah, you're going to get these incidents of longer sentences, but my guess is that judges have the leeway in terms of sentencing to take a look at the person's criminal history. They have parole and probation do a pre-sentence report. And I've seen these pre-sentence reports hundreds of times, and there are multiple arrests, multiple convictions, multiple incarcerations. So my guess is that if you have a person who goes to prison for a length of time, say for the theft that you just mentioned, it's because of their criminal history and their criminal background. I think that's how we get there. So the rate of incarceration is coming down considerably in the United States. We are at record lows for the number of people and the rates of people that we have within the criminal justice system, within the correctional system in the United States. The disparities between African Americans and whites and Hispanics seems to be going down in terms of who's in prison. So that is a general answer to the incarceration question.
Okay. Thank you so much. So we have another guest that's in the studio with us, and he's joined us. And thank you so much for joining us with us today, Rob. So good morning. And we want to kind of for you to be able to share with the audience a little bit about you, and then what you do, and what kind of compelled you to be able to get into private investigations. Of course, I wanted to speak also, which you did not want me to say, and things. He was an actor. I had to say it. Sorry.
No, a failed stand-up comic. Big difference.
Okay.
A failed stand-up comic. And shortly, with all my joking, you'll realize why I didn't succeed.
Okay.
So my story is basically, my father was a private investigator in New Jersey, former state trooper, and in the 80s and 90s, he was the guy who busted people for the fake Rolexes and the T-shirts and all the counterfeits all up and down the Jersey Shore, New York City, Canal Street, Philadelphia, all that stuff.
Okay.
So I grew up around that. I conducted my first investigation at the age of 12 in 1982, and I was paid in funnel cake. And the other part that Diane was mentioning was after high school, I rebelled against the family business and went to Bible college.
Okay.
After 3 semesters of that, I realized I love Jesus, hate the rules. Hopped in my car. This is out of Philly. Hopped in my car, went out to LA to become a stand-up comic. And while I was out there pursuing that, I got married to my wife and decided to see if there were any opportunities in my father's line of work.
Okay.
And I started doing some of the first major street raids in Los Angeles back in the 90s with the same counterfeiting and all that kind of stuff. And while I was there, I also was sometimes I say I'm like the Forrest Gump of investigators, because I happen to be, when it comes to the internet, I happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Okay.
When the first intellectual property investigations were happening online, and Microsoft was having all those issues. And you've heard of like the DMCA, which is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. I was a part of all that, but I was really, like I said, right place, right time. And I started my own business in 2001, 2001. And I've been protecting clients' interests ever since. I'm more, just so you know, I'm less academic than Leonard. I'm more anecdotal. Most of my work is going to be,
hands-on
stories and things like that. Yeah. So this is really fun. I'm really happy to be on here.
Okay. So we're going to go back to Leonard. Leonard has shared millions of resources of, statistics as to in crime. And we've just shared a lot of information on the different topics. And so we're going to go, I guess, to the next question, and then you can be able to chime in off of Leonard. So Leonard, this is the next one, because Leonard is the one, he's right there doing all the reporting. He's right there with the media. And as I told him before, Rob, I thought he was Rush Limbaugh. I did. Before I'm like, oh no, this guy's not coming on here. So look, Leonard. So
I'm just ugly. That's all. I mean,
no, you're not. So we've already talked about the crime. We talked about statistics. We want to talk about the police. We want to talk about where do they go from here, and where did they go? I know that you talked about we lost tens of thousands of police officers, law enforcement, since people have been, chiding against them. Oh, you do, excessive force. You didn't do this right. So where are they going to? Are they going to other police departments? Because I know if there's here in the South, in Tennessee, they're flying off the hook. They're just walking off the jobs. They don't even care anymore. So have you experienced as to where they're going? Are they changing their careers, or they're going to something in a higher capacity, or what?
With the early indications is that they're leaving law enforcement entirely.
Oh, wow.
And that's the problem. And that's one of the reasons why we have such a crime problem and such a violence problem. Is because we don't even have enough police officers to respond to 911 calls in many jurisdictions throughout the country. Wow. CNN just did a huge report, and I'm about to come out with an article on it about police officers in Minneapolis and in other cities just leaving the job. And, most cops became cops because we saw ourselves as protectors. We saw ourselves as fair human beings. We saw ourselves as willing and anxious to treat people equally, regardless of who they are. And we entered law enforcement with that sense that we want to serve and we want to protect people. A lot of cops have sat down with their wives who have ordered them to leave law enforcement. And with their husbands and insisting that they leave law enforcement. Oh. They're sitting down and saying to themselves, okay, last year I was a servant and I was a protector. Now I'm just a racist, brutal thug, according to the media and to everybody else. And, you know, law enforcement doesn't pay enough to be seen as brutal or wrong or overly aggressive or overly violent. It just doesn't pay enough to convince people to enter the job. Recruitment is down by 60%. You know, people don't want to become police officers. The existing police officers are leaving, and we as citizens are paying the price because we've gone overboard in terms of the criticism of police officers. So, you know, what agencies are doing is trying harder than ever to use lie detector tests, credit backgrounds, social media scores, investigations to try to find the right person, to try to find the right people to become police officers, because Lord knows not everybody should be a cop. Right. So they're trying to go overboard and making sure that they find the best people they possibly can. It's just that the numbers are not in law enforcement's favor at the moment. Police departments throughout the country are stating that there are big reductions in terms of the people who they have to be police officers.
Okay, that's fair enough. So Rob, so since we've experienced this, we know that 60% down with law enforcement. So how has that beefed up your expertise, your field of expertise? I know it has done shot out the roof since we don't have the men in blue. You're gonna have to go undercover and do what you need to do in order to perhaps maybe fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah, and what happens is on the private sector here, and exactly what you're saying, Diane, is that they can call the cops, but you know, for the most part, police are busy doing, you know, millions of other things. So, for example, some of my clients we work with on a threat basis. So, someone says they're going to kill one of our executives or burn their house down, or even one of the front-facing, you know, representatives, customer service, or the community leaders on Twitter and things like that, who have a public face, get threatened constantly. And it's not something that we can just call the police on, because if we called the police on everything, they wouldn't be able to prioritize it. So what we do as a private company is we profile the person. So instead of just seeing a tweet and reporting the tweet, we'll identify the person behind it and determine, using like a 4-tier system, and we'll say whether or not it warrants follow-up, or even like a red hot type of situation where we need to call law enforcement right away. And from an assistance perspective, what we've found is, and you know, I'm very I'm pro law enforcement, but I'm also a libertarian, which means I think smaller government, you know, more private sector, you know, is a good thing as well. And what I have found is that non-officers, so just local private investigators. So if something happens, and then, you know, we get a threat in, say, you know, a suburb of Memphis, and then we have to head down and do a door knock and find out if this guy's really going to shoot up a school or really going to bomb, you know, our client's office. The plainclothes, you know, mom or dad type, you know, knocking on the door and, you know, maybe a little bit of finger wagging, like, what kind of stunt are you trying to pull, you know, that kind of thing. But the wellness aspect of it, where we say, you know, well, we want to make sure you were okay, you know. And the thing is, different than the government, the private sector makes their money off of these people as consumers. So the way a corporation handles it's much different. Because if I say I did it for a movie studio, well, I want to make sure that movie studio, that person doesn't boycott their movies or post online that their thugs came and did whatever. So it's really important that our enforcement is more soft glove and encouraging these folks to still be consumers afterwards. So that's where a lot of our approach had been. And crazy enough, throughout the years, and we've been doing these major threats like this for about a little over a decade, and thousands of cases have come across my desk. And the shooter situation, one thing that really dawned on me recently after the Cremo, Robert Cremo in Highland Park, Illinois, when I saw his face, I said, that kid with his funny hair and piercings, I was like, that kid could have been my nephew. you know, and I just, some kind of weird, like almost like the end of The Sixth Sense, a flashback of all these cases that came across my desk.
Yeah.
You know, 90 something percent of them are, you know, males from, you know, 11 to 30, 35, and they're disenfranchised. They're disenfranchised young males. And this goes across all racial, you know, all racial, because, you know, the shooters, many of the shooters turn out to be white or mixed race. But, you know, when you have, you know, in the Hispanic communities and the Black communities, you have people on the streets recruiting those people to do bad things.
Yeah.
You know? So they have, the disenfranchised young males all have a bad place to go, you know, and that's what I see now. And I think it's almost an epidemic of them. And you could go back to Rebel Without a Cause, you know, and look at, you know, a typical suburban kid, how he can act out, and, you know, and that movie ended in a suicide by cop, and that's from the 50s.
Wow. Okay.
You know, so anyway, so I do believe a lot of this stuff has to do with figuring out how to reach these kids at a reasonable time, you know, and also too, you know, I believe one thing that Black Lives Matter really pounded on, and I think they're 100% right on. And this isn't about defunding the police. I think that was a mistake, you know, that the blanket statement. But I do believe in that sentiment. The concept, there was a concept that was being pushed along with that was a lot more profound and less of a trigger, you know, emotional trigger, which was to send plainclothes social workers out to some of these things instead of armed police.
Okay.
And I know from thousands of cases that I've worked, I send unarmed plainclothes folks. And in a lot of those cases, you know, I mean, bouncers at bars aren't armed, you know, but, you know, they hire bouncers that have good people skills. Yeah, they're usually big too, because, you know, it's one deterrent. But right. But it's all about your ability to de-escalate a situation. And I do think that's another big thing. And I think Black Lives Matter was right on with that, which was, you know, more of these folks. And the cops, the armed police, can deal with the real heavy stuff. You know, they don't have to be sent out and be like, oh, geez, another mom and pop fight, you know, that kind of thing. You know, they can send somebody who's got really good people skills and knows how to de-escalate. And that's not me putting down the police, because I come from a police family and all that. But I just wanted to throw that out there as something to throw in the mix. You know, there are a lot of folks, and I do think, you know, as Leonard's saying, you know, that, you know, these guys, every time they go out there, every time they do a traffic stop, they're thinking, how am I going to survive this? You know what I mean? Everyone. And on the other side of that, you know, most African Americans are thinking the same thing when they get pulled over. You know, so there's a lot of that. But and I'm not making an opinion on that per se, but I'm just saying that there is a lot of room to have plainclothes, unarmed, you know, civilians, you know, doing some of this work. Anyway, that's my spiel on that. But I do think it's important.
Right, absolutely. So we're gonna stay right there when it comes to plain clothes, and this question is for both of you. We're gonna start with Leonard. So I was sharing with Leonard, Rob, before we kind of went on live and we recorded, and this is in regards to another case study that I did. And so the police were, this is this advocate group that they feel that police officers or law enforcement do not have the right to set themselves up like stings or what have you and capture their children, you know, perhaps maybe dating girls that are underage or what have you, and it's actually a decoy and what have you. And like I was telling Leonard, hey, look, it took me about 45 days to get this guy onto the show because I didn't feel comfortable, didn't want him to be on the show badgering law enforcement. And then he was on Dr. Phil. And I'm like, oh no, we can't deal with this. So anyway, so I wasn't going to do it by myself. I didn't feel comfortable. I
Yeah.
went and got a state prosecutor. So when she came onto the show, they lit her up. She's on YouTube and they blowed her up. I said, look, did you want me to take this down and you don't have to deal with it? The whole advocate group came against her. So I think the father did not understand what law enforcement had the right to do. First of all, your son ain't got no don't have any business online doing anything undercover from the and he specifically told the girl, you're not a police officer, are you? And it was a police officer. Are you over age and what have you? And I think the police officer did say, yeah, I'm of age, but he knew that he was talking to someone underage. And so we want to talk about that a little bit because people get the wrong concept. The law enforcement does have the right to protect people's children, right? They have the right to do that. They have the right to go undercover and to see if there's people out there that are being perverts, okay, and being perverts against children. So if you feel comfortable about that, Leonard, I know you're the media man. We want to see if you can be able to talk to us about that. I felt sorry for the father. I called him at home before we did this. I don't usually call my guests, period. But he frightened me. So I said, no, I better get me some backup. Let me go get a state prosecutor or something to help me to let her take the licks and what have you. And she did. And she was like, I'll take them. And I said, you want me to? And they was ranting at her, the whole advocate group. And I'm like, you on Dr. Phil? We don't do stuff like that. I don't deal with Dr. Phil medias and stuff. So we want to talk about that so people can have a general understanding as to the law, as to what the law can do to be able to protect children that are underage and those who go and try to fool with children that are minors. They don't have no business doing that.
First of all, the law enforcement is asked every single day, why isn't it lowering crime? It doesn't matter what kind of crime, whether it's a sexual abuse against minors, or whether it's armed robberies or homicides or violence across the board. So every day, law enforcement is meeting with community groups, meeting with reporters, meeting with the mayor, meeting with the city council, and they're all screaming at law enforcement, reduce crime, reduce crime, reduce crime. So law enforcement is under an immense amount of pressure to do whatever it is that they can, while recognizing that law enforcement has real limits in terms of what it is that it can do about crime. So you specifically, and so part of that answer goes to proactive policing, which I'm not quite sure we have time to go, which is the only modality indicated by the U.S. Department of Justice where it actually reduces crime, based upon hundreds and hundreds of studies. The flip side, getting into the specifics in terms of child sexual abuse, law enforcement has a very difficult relationship with the private groups that are doing this. There's concern that some of the private groups may be going a bit too far in terms of trying to capture child sex offenders. Law enforcement is out there, and they're also posing as children. Right. Minor children. But all I can tell you is that there's controversy. There's one side of me that says good for the private groups who are trying to entrap these people. And then you go to the law enforcement side and saying, I'm not quite sure private individuals or groups should really be involved in this sort of thing. Please leave it to law enforcement. So there's no answer from a research point of view. There's no answer from a statistical point of view. We just know that you can't go online nowadays without somebody trying to commit fraud. Every single day, somebody is trying to commit fraud against you, your family, your child. So they're out there. They're very, very, very persistent. And having an age-appropriate conversation with children in terms of what sort of messages they get and how to respond to those messages, if they respond at all, becomes an extraordinarily big part of this conversation.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Rob.
Yeah, an interesting thing about this, because, and a lot of us throughout the last, say, decade or so have watched To Catch a Predator, the Chris Hansen show. And I couldn't get enough of it. It was fun to watch people get caught doing something with their hand in a cookie jar. Right. He was, kind of along what Leonard said, is, these guys worked with the officers and did this. They work with the police in that city and things like that. Mm-hmm. Now, so some of these are orchestrated with the police, some aren't. I have kind of an issue with anybody who says they're doing something for good and are advertising it, because we're in a day and age of fame seekers, and these folks who are out here catching bad guys on their own. I mean, I see a guy on TikTok who is putting signs on people's cars because they leave their cart out and don't put it back in the place where the cart's supposed to go. Everybody's a vigilante, and again, they're all doing this for fame, and attention. Mm-hmm. Now, so I do believe you have to question the intentions of these folks, and yes, sting operations by private individuals is very, very scary, especially if there is no regulation involved. As a private investigator, I perform sting operations all the time, but I'm regulated by the state of Texas, and I have $5 million insurance, that's required by the state of Texas. And when I conduct these, my clients know, because of my track record, that I'm not going to cause this person to do anything they're not already likely to do. I'm not enticing them with something. They're offering that product and we're buying it, rather than being the guy who offers it. Now, there's something really shady that went on back in the 80s and the 90s, and it actually still happens now with even like terrorism kind of cases, is what's called an empty briefcase sting. And what they would do is, and especially in the Miami Vice days and all that, the DEA to push their numbers up with arrests, they would set up these big drug deals, right? And it would be a buyer, they would bust a buyer, right, with an empty briefcase supposedly full of cocaine. Okay. And the concept of the empty briefcase sting has always been controversial, because the person didn't purchase anything. A kid in high school, he buys a bag of oregano off of a cop. Is he a criminal? So those defenses are always there. And again, there are arguments to or from, are the police actually taking a criminal off the street, or did they create a criminal by selling him those goods? So that's something that even in the private sector, you have to really be concerned about. Is that are you taking someone off? Are you subtracting from the crime, or are you just adding to a statistic?
Okay, great. So we have before we conclude, we got 2 more questions before we conclude the show. And so the last question, of course, we want to talk about Leonard's article, Success in the Media. But before we get there, put a pin in that. We want to talk about, I had an opportunity, as I shared with Leonard, to be able to work for a private prison system. And sometimes in private systems, I know this can be a good question for you, Rob, but we'll see what Leonard has to say. He has all the numbers, all the statistics, 5, 6, 7 million, 2,000, 20 trillion. He got all the numbers. So you have in prison systems where attorneys, which I think now, where I've read some articles, it's illegal for attorneys to be able to connect with these phone companies and with the prison, evidence on their clients and other clients. Okay. And then I think one attorney I saw in this article, he sued the phone companies. Like, I think GTL is one of them. They're really bad for that. But the attorney sued them for allowing the other attorney, allowing the defense attorney to record and get all of the information, off from the prison. I mean, all of them are in it together. Come on, y'all, let's be honest.
100%.
Not calling out any names or anything like that, but prison systems are in it as well. I worked for CCA, corporate, and I don't know if it was going on back then, but it's a high commodity today where you see a lot of attorneys what they will do, they can't go out, they don't want to go out and get the evidence, but they will connect with these phone companies, tap the phones and get the information. And there was an attorney, I think back in 2020, he went in there and he sued the phone company, and he got the defense attorney in trouble as well for obtaining that information. I mean, that's against the law, isn't it? Come on, Leonard, tell us. You got
look, the bottom line is that attorney-client, there is attorney-client privilege. We're not supposed to be recording the phone calls. There's a lot of correctional systems that record all phone calls.
Right.
It doesn't matter what comes. You're not supposed to interfere with attorney-client privilege. But if you suspect that a crime is being committed, you can go and get a warrant and convince a judge that even though it's an attorney-client privilege, they believe that a criminal conspiracy is currently happening. And if that judge approves, then you can pretty much tap that line. So the bottom line behind it all is that we've got to respect everybody's rights. We're obligated to respect everybody's rights. If you suspect ongoing criminal activity, go get a warrant and let the judge approve the warrant.
Okay. Rob, which this probably would be even in your area, since you even can be able to get something now where they can be able to do it with yourself. Yeah, apps where they can invest. They can. Okay, go ahead, Rob. We're not going to get into that.
No. Well, but the recording of phone calls, it's a very touchy thing because, there is no expectation of privacy in jail in many situations, but there are limits to that. There are limits. They don't have cameras in the conjugal visit rooms, not that I know of, there's certain level of intimacy or privacy that is still respected. And there's the law and there's ethics, and there have to be a little of both. Like as a business owner, I have the right to monitor anything on my property, including the phones, the emails that my employees use, the computers that are on my property. They sign a document that says I have the right to look at it. But what kind of person would I be if I was reading their emails? The emails there, even though they probably shouldn't be sending personal emails through work. Right. What kind of person would I be if I were reading them and looking at their texts and things like that back and forth with the husband? So there a lot of times there's an issue here, and that's why I believe in the public's. When the public has outcry, sometimes it's just the news hyping things up, but sometimes there really are things to address. And, in most of these cases, they are ethical issues and not necessarily legal issues. I mean, we all know with the Patriot Act, and I'm a Republican, by registration, and during the Patriot Act, I was asleep at the wheel. I was like, yeah, let's catch these bad guys, and now I'm looking back and I'm like, yeah, it's legal to do all this expletive, but is it ethical, and should it be legal? Right. So yeah, those questions I think should always be a frontline topic. Are these laws fair to the average human? And is privacy sacred?
Okay, that's fair enough. So Leonard, we want to talk about your latest article that you have written, Success with the Media, and then you also shared that you have revised this article. So tell us a little bit about that and some of the takeaways that you expect that your readers to perceive from your article that you have written.
Well, the article that I'm mentioning is the latest data from the U.S. Department of Justice as to violent crime in the United States. There is a separate article on crimeinamerica.net, my website. Law enforcement, national law enforcement and digital publications routinely, like Law Enforcement Today, routinely run my articles. The Success with the Media is a book that I wrote about my 35 years talking to reporters, dealing with reporters. And I've had the privilege of dealing with every national network, every international network over 35 years. in terms of dealing with the media. And, I look at the media in the same way that I look at cops. There is a reputation issue with the media. There is a trust issue with the media. The great majority of reporters that I've been in touch with seem to be honest, decent human beings who are simply trying to do a job and go home, just the same as cops are. So reporters in the media in general, their honesty ratings are far below those of law enforcement. But I feel a little sorry for them because, again, I think most of them are honest. Most of them try their hardest. We talked about the difficulty of a cop making a split-second decision as things break around him or her. Well, the reporter's got to do the same thing. Right. So what I was trying to do was to give tips to people in terms of dealing with reporters, and at the same time giving tips to the media in terms of how to deal with those of us who are spokespeople for government. It goes both ways. But you have to have honest relationships. You've got to be honest with each other. And honesty is by far the best policy, because when the media gets to trust you, you have a lot of leeway to say whatever it is that you want to say, and you have a lot of influence. When reporters don't trust you, think that you're not giving out proper information, think that you don't know what it is that you're talking about, then you don't have the same level of power as you once did. So as I tell other spokespeople from throughout the country, how much power do you want? Your power depends upon a cooperative relationship with the media, and your power depends upon honesty. There are some people who don't buy that. There are some people who do, but in 35 years, being honest and being up on my game in terms of the statistics about my agency or the national criminal justice system, I think have served me well.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, Rob, is there any blog that you would like to share? Any articles with the audience?
Not necessarily. I have been doing a talk lately on the particular shooter situation and how the shooters. I have both my parents committed suicide, so I almost have a PhD in PSD when it comes to suicide and that kind of stuff. And with all of my threat work over the last decade, I can tell you that these shooters are committing suicide. Yeah, there's one or two where, law enforcement, some of these folks, they say they're in it for the fame or they're in it for this. Almost every single one of them they have no escape plan. They're in it to end it, and they want to get the last word. That's pretty much the only fame that they want, is to be heard for that one last time. I do want to push the suicide shooter correlation, because it's something that I'm really trying to push on my own, because once we start to realize that, and we realize that there are places in this country to counsel disenfranchised kids and the suicide support systems and stuff, we pay a lot more of attention to that, I think we'll see less crime.
Okay, great. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being my guest on today on the panelist. Would you all like to share the last, networking opportunity as to if any books that you have published, any social media sites that you would like the audience to be able to follow you on, and also your websites links? You can be able to do that at this time. We're going to start with Leonard. Whatever you want to share as to how they can be able to network and follow you after the show, or any of your media that you have published, they can be able to go straight to your information and they can connect with you there.
It's crimeinamerica.net. That's the website that I've had for the last 12 years. I'm on all the usual social media platforms of Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, others, Reddit. Reddit's always fun. The book is called Success with the Media. And, I'm sort of proud of that. And beyond that, the only last thing I wanted to say is, it's women who rock. One of the things that we did not touch upon was the statistics of violence against women. And that women now have an equal, and in some years a higher rate of violence than men. And that's different from just 5 or 6 years ago, where there was a clear difference between the rate of violence towards women and the rate of violence towards men. It now seems to be equal, or in some cases exceeds those of men. So something is going on regarding our society and I dare say the abuse of women. And I think that's something that we should be looking at. So that's my final word.
Okay. And then that made me also think about this other crime that we just had in Memphis. And so what happened was, I don't know if you all heard about it, but it turned into a national type of incident where she goes jogging like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Come to find out, this clown rapes her the year before, and then Memphis, backed up with these rape kits, and it's so long we could be able to go with this, but we got a suicide prevention panelist coming up in a few more minutes too, and we didn't get into that as well. But he rapes her a year before, and then they did not have the kit tested. If they would have had the kit tested last year, he wouldn't have been able to rape her. And then he murdered this woman back here about 3 weeks ago. It was horrible. So you had people from all over the United States come out of their homes, came down to Memphis, and they finished the walk. And I'm like, how can he do that? How can he rape? How can he be that bold to do something stupid like that?
It's the endless tragedy of not funding the criminal justice system properly. We are years behind on rape kits. We are years behind on DNA comparison.
Oh, so that's just not Memphis. That's everywhere?
No, that's happening throughout the United States, and it's a tragedy. In many jurisdictions, we are up to 10 years behind in terms of rape kits and DNA kits. Somewhere along the line, the criminal justice system has to be properly funded because we would be saving a lot of lives. And it is really an unspeakable tragedy as to why jurisdictions are not funding their full capacity to test rape kits and DNA kits as they come in.
Okay, you got the final word on that, Rob. Do you feel that the reason why this is happening is simply because, because when we had the Bill Cosby era, some of they really didn't believe that he did this. So you feel that they disrespecting, or it's a discrimination towards women? That's the reason why they got all of these rape kits on backlog.
Yeah, I believe everything in the government is backlogged. My passport, my wife's green card have been backlogged forever too. But like I said, as a person who doesn't believe in big government, I don't believe the problem ever is the government needs more of your money. I think there might be other solutions, but as far as funding, there are certain areas that maybe should be funded more than others, but I typically don't count on the government. I'm a Second Amendment advocate, and I believe, and in Women Who Rock, a Wall Street Journal just had an article, or maybe it was New York Times, that the number one rise in gun ownership is women now, because of how dangerous life is. And I believe, and I work with cops, I speak to cops. You can't expect police officers to prevent crimes, especially with murders. They come afterwards. Okay. They come after you're hurt. So all those kits and stuff work when you have to compare something, but when the crime's happening, the cops are far off doing something else.
Right.
They come at the end. So I do believe that it's there's got to be some kind of fair balance where it's government, but it's also got to be education in the private sector, so that individuals can take care of themselves. And as far as my information, I'm Holmes PI on everything. Okay. So easy to find me. Facebook, my blog. You can find my company on there, but you look for me, Holmes PI. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, everything, but Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn are probably the places you'll find me the most.
Okay, gentlemen, it has been a glorious time with you all. That's the reason why I make sure I have the experts on the show, simply because so they can make sure that they are bringing in the right statistics. If they have something to say, we're going to put a disclaimer on this too. They can't fight against the statistics. It's true and it's real. So thank you so much. And for the audience, just follow us right back to our next show. We're doing Suicide Prevention Month, and we have a wonderful panel list that is set up for that. And we're going to be digging into the most important things when it comes to suicide and the help and the resources that you need. So, gentlemen, I hope to have you back on again. I'm serious, because this was fun today.
This was real fun.
Yeah, it's sad, but it was fun because you all brought the information to the table. We talked about all types of different things. We talked about the culture. We talked about the racial backgrounds. We talked about the demographics of it. And of course, Leonard, AKA Rush Limbaugh, he brought in all the numbers. he brought in all the statistics. And Rob, we thank you so much for bringing it on a background level as a private investigator. I hope nobody don't share this and things and say I'm saying something against Rush Limbaugh to have me sued or what have you. So, but anyway, gentlemen, thank y'all so much. I hope to be able to post something else that you all will engage, because this was fun. I like people that comes in and they're not afraid to share the information, and they bring the resources, facts, and of their expertise. So both of you all have a wonderful day.
God bless, Diane.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.